All right, let's dive into something a little different today, huh? Customs officers.
Mm.
We're talking about a career that's way more than just, stamps and uniforms.
Definitely more than meets the eye.
Right. And we've got a ton of info here. Career guides, interview tips, even some AI stuff that's got me, honestly, a little, excited, but also a tad creeped out.
I get it.
But the thing that really jumps out, at least to me, is this whole thing about keeping trade moving smoothly, but also, obviously, keeping our country safe. It's like walking a tightrope, isn't it?
It really is a fascinating balance when you think about it. You've got this global system that relies on goods moving freely,
Right.
but at the same time, those same goods, they could be a huge risk if they end up in the wrong hands.
And it's not like it used to be, right? It's not just about finding that stereotypical suitcase crammed with, whatever they're smuggling.
Absolutely
The
not.
stuff we've been looking at paints a picture of smuggling. It's like constantly evolving.
Exactly. And getting more sophisticated all the time. I mean, think about 3D printing for a second.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Revolutionized manufacturing, no doubt. But it's also opened up this whole new world for counterfeiting. Smuggling on a scale we probably haven't even begun to grasp.
It's kind of scary when you put it like that. It makes you think about just how much stuff is crossing borders every single day
Yeah,
and how any little thing could be hiding something. Not so little.
it's true. And that's where the human element, the human judgment, becomes absolutely crucial. Think about a busy port, right? You've got all those containers.
It's overwhelming just thinking about it.
It's not just about, scanning them. It's about the people, seeing who's doing what their motivations might be, sensing when something just feels off.
That's what I find so interesting. All the sources we've got here, they list the skills you'd expect,
Mm-hmm.
detail-oriented, analytical, all that good stuff.
True.
But then they start talking about psychology and being aware of different cultures.
Right.
That's when things get really interesting for me. It's like being a detective, but instead of fingerprints, it's, I don't know, subtle behaviors and tiny little cues.
You're spot on. You need a good eye, sure, but you also need to be able to, read people, understand where they're coming from culturally. You need a bit of intuition, to be honest. It's about patterns, anomalies, things that just don't quite add up.
Speaking of patterns, one guide mentioned microexpressions, like as a tool to spot deception. Kind of freaked me out, not gonna lie.
Yeah, I see why.
Is that like a real thing?
Yeah.
Or just Hollywood making stuff up?
It's a real area of study, though how well it works in the real world, that's still up for debate.
Okay. So let's say someone has that sharp eye, the cultural awareness, maybe even a knack for spotting a fake smile.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you even go from there? What does a career path even look like? Because you're not just like a customs officer forever, right?
No, not at all. The stuff we've been going through outlines a pretty fascinating progression, actually, starting with those hands-on roles, boots on the ground.
Yeah.
But then it goes into positions that are surprisingly analytical and strategic.
So it's not just about like catching bad guys and seizing illegal stuff. You could actually move up and change how customs works as a whole.
You could. As you get more experience, you might move into roles focused on data analysis, looking for trends in the data, even shaping policy. Imagine that, going from inspecting shipments on the ground to predicting smuggling routes using some crazy algorithm.
Wow. See, that's the stuff I never would have thought of. Speaking of stuff I wouldn't have thought of, can we talk about this whole AI thing?
Yeah.
One source, RoleCatcher, they're using AI to, get this, analyze job descriptions, prep candidates for interviews, even give them feedback on their responses. It's like a career coach, but, one that's got access to your entire digital history.
Yeah, it's a whole new world, that's for sure. But I think the thing to remember is AI, at least for now, it's just the tool, right? It can crunch numbers, look for patterns, do that kind of analysis way faster than a human ever could.
Right.
But ultimately, it's still us humans making the calls.
I guess that is reassuring. For now, at least. But I can't help but wonder, what's next? Could we see AI analyzing all the cargo manifests, flagging potential risks, maybe even identifying smugglers just by looking at their faces?
It's definitely something to think about.
It feels huge, like we're on the edge of something big. I just can't tell if it's, exciting or terrifying.
It definitely makes you wonder where the line is, right? But before we go full sci-fi, let's bring it back down to earth for a sec.
Yeah.
You've been digging into all this research. What's really struck you about the kind of person who'd be good at this job, really good?
It's funny. It's this mix of being tough, mentally tough, but also having empathy.
I see that.
You're making these huge decisions, often under a lot of pressure, but you're also dealing with people from all over all walks of life, right?
Right.
Some are just trying to go about their day. Others might be trying to take advantage of the system.
It's true. It's that constant tension, isn't it? Security versus keeping things moving.
Yeah,
And the goal isn't to shut down global trade altogether. It's about making sure those goods and the people moving them are legit, that they're not a threat.
and speaking of threats, it goes way beyond just the usual suspects like, drugs or weapons.
Oh, for sure.
One of these sources mentioned counterfeit medicine.
Yeah.
That's scary. Talk about a public health nightmare waiting to happen.
It's huge. You're talking about everything from fake luxury goods that hurt legitimate businesses to endangered species being smuggled for profit, even cultural artifacts stolen from their countries of origin.
It's almost like being like a protector of history and culture, not just a customs officer.
In a way, I guess it is. You're protecting your country's economic interests, its security, and its place in the world. Which this actually brings up another thing that came up a lot in the materials you shared. Learning. Constantly learning and adapting.
Because the world doesn't stand still, right?
Yeah.
Especially not for the folks trying to bend the rules.
Exactly. RoleCatcher, actually, they had some really interesting stuff on this. They use AI to analyze new smuggling trends. Wow. Helps them stay ahead of the game. Because think about it. Customs regulations change, new technologies pop up all the time, and smugglers are always finding new ways to exploit the system.
So it's not enough to just be sharp and observant. You kind of need to be a bit of a techie, too.
It definitely helps. Think about cryptocurrency, for example. It's legit, obviously, but it's also opened up a whole new can of worms for money laundering and moving money illegally. Customs officers have to get how that stuff works if they're going to counter it.
It makes sense when you think about it. But let's switch gears a bit. What about actually landing a job in this field? I mean, it can't be as simple as filling out an application and acing the interview, can it?
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. From what I gathered, preparation is key, both in terms of education and actual experience. Having a solid background in something related, criminal justice, international relations, maybe even psychology that can give you a leg up.
So hitting the books is still important, even if the job is pretty hands-on.
It's essential. You need that foundation to really grasp international trade, all the regulations, the legal side of law enforcement.
Makes sense. Okay, so you've got the education part down. What about real-world experience? How do you even break into that side of things?
That's where things like internships, volunteering, and just networking come in. Spending time at a port, a border agency, even a logistics company involved in international trade can give you those real-world insights and practical skills you just can't get from a textbook.
It sounds like you never really stop learning, though, right?
You got it. It's always changing. The world of customs, that's what makes it so challenging, but also like really stimulating.
Yeah, definitely. So we've talked about the skills, the knowledge, the experience, but I'm curious, what about the person themselves? What kind of personality really thrives in this line of work? Because it seems like it takes a certain kind of person to handle the pressure, the responsibility, and let's be real, sometimes it's got to be kind of, monotonous.
Oh, absolutely. It's not for everyone. You can't just check all the boxes and assume you're good to go.
Right.
Based on everything we've looked at, I'd say the people who do best, they're naturally curious. They like digging into things, picking up on little details that other people miss, and they can stay focused, even when things get repetitive.
So like a detective who also meditates.
Huh. Something like that. You also need a really strong moral compass.
That makes sense.
Like we were saying, you're constantly dealing with those gray areas, making judgment calls that have real consequences.
And it's not always about catching the bad guy either, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about, like, sticking up for someone who got caught in a bad situation, even if it was their fault.
Exactly. You need that balance, being skeptical but also having empathy. You enforce the rules, but you also realize it's not always so black and white.
I'll be honest, this deep dive has been eye-opening. I never realized how much responsibility customs officers actually have.
It's a lot. They're protecting our borders, our economy, even our history and culture. Most people don't even think about it.
True. So for anyone listening who might be thinking about this as a career, any final thoughts? Any words of wisdom?
I'd say if you're looking for a job that's going to keep you on your toes where every day is different, this could be it. You got to be a quick thinker, able to adapt to anything, and never stop learning.
The world's not going to slow down anytime soon, right?
Well, not a chance.
Well, this has been incredible. It's really got me thinking about something we didn't really touch on. We talk about how AI is changing customs work, but what about the human side? What skills are going to be even more important in a world where machines are doing more and more?
That's a great question. And I think you're right. The more automated things become, the more valuable those human skills become.
Like critical thinking, problem solving, even just being able to relate to people.
Exactly. It's almost like the human touch becomes even more important.
It's just like what sets us apart.
And who knows what that'll look like in 10, 20 years.
It's exciting and a little scary all at the same time, right? Well, on that note, a huge thank you to you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of customs officers. It's been, honestly, a wild ride. And to our listeners, if this sparks your curiosity, don't let it end here. There's a whole world out there waiting to be explored. Until next time, keep those questions coming and never stop exploring.